What you see on your slide at this time is the safe harbor statement. It serves as a reminder that this advisor webcast is intended for information purposes only. Any features or functionality described for Oracle's products remain at the sole discretion of Oracle. Now, let's get started with our presentation. Second, if you're ready, I'll turn the webcast over to you, and you can begin.
Sure. Thank you, Sharonda. Hello all. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending on the place you are located. I'm Chetan Sirsad, working as Senior Software Engineer here in Oracle. Thank you for uniting here. I hope you all will find this presentation useful. Here is our agenda for today. First, we're going to cover security concepts for core Siebel application. Here, we're going to cover different authentication methods and security adapters, followed with the security concepts for Oracle BI Publisher. Then learn about Special Siebel Inbound Web Service, BIPSiebelSecurityWS. WS stands for Web Service. We'll discuss about its methods and the uses. Further, we're going to cover details on Siebel Security Model, as well the LDAP Security Model, and their configuration for LDAP Authenticated Environment. Then we will cover basics of single sign-on and BIP configuration for single sign-on environment. Finally, we're going to learn about SSL, Secure Socket Layer, its basics, and BI Publisher concepts for configuring the SSL. Moving on, let's learn about important security concepts for Siebel application. Here, we will discuss security architecture, which is already available with Siebel applications. As we know, the Siebel applications can be secured at several levels. For an example, user data visibility, as well the view access for various screens should be restricted. So, user can see only the appropriate views and the related data according to the job function he or she is doing. Now, this is done by the positions and the responsibilities in Siebel. Similarly, access to the application should be restricted only to the authorized users. Now, this is done by application authentication strategies. We will discuss more about various authentication strategies in upcoming slides. Now, for various reasons, customer wants intra-server communication to be secured as well. The reason being, the data should not be hacked by hacker. Here, SSL is used. Moving on, at very brief level, authentication includes credential collection. Here, the credentials are collected by security adapters. Now, we're going to discuss what is security adapters in upcoming slides. Security adapters pass further those credentials for verification. Here, for a database authentication, credentials will be verified at database level, whereas for third-party authenticated applications, it will be verified at authenticated server level. The further control will be passed to the object manager, and the session management will take place. Let's cover this in detail. Simply said, the process for whole this authentication will be to create a user, then the user will log on, adapters will check the password, at the same time verify the user. Once all is done, the control will be passed to the object manager, and finally the session will be created. Now, the question, what information do we actually need for authentication? As shown in the diagram, we need the unique identifier for a user. Now, in case of Siebel, it's normally a user ID. Then, second is the role assigned for that particular user. Again, for Siebel, it's either the position or the responsibility. Finally, the most important, password for that user and the logon policies. Taking the example for logon policies like the password strength, etc. Let's go further on credentials. Now, identifiers are nothing but some key which uniquely identifies a user. For example, some applications use a national identification number as a user ID. Just like we have the social security number, we also call it as a SSN. Some use email address as a unique identifier. Some applications may have the network user ID, or some may have the randomly generated ID as a unique identifier. Now, for some financial or highly secured applications, they might use advanced techniques. As an example, something like the finger scanning, eye retina scan, and so on. So, where exactly do we store a password? Passwords can be stored in many ways, either by hashing it or by using various encryption techniques. As shown, the password can be stored at the operating system, file system level as well, or a database level columns, or a directory server attributes like LDAP or ADSI. Now, let's discuss this again in much detail in upcoming slides. Moving on, Siebel application supports multiple authentication methods. Siebel application uses security adapters to authenticate a user. Now, what exactly the security adapter is? The security adapters are nothing but software programs that allow Siebel servers or object managers to authenticate a user. Going in detail, Siebel uses 4 types of security adapters. Now, those are nothing but a profile subsystem from a Siebel. Going further details on that, DBSec adapter, this is a security adapter for the database authentication. LDAPsec adapter, this is for LDAP authentication. ADSIsec adapter for Active Directory authentication. CustomSec adapter for custom authentication methods. Generally, this applies for the custom authentication approach. Just a detail, Siebel provides a software development kit by which the users can develop their own security adapters, which is called as custom security adapters. Now, depending on different business needs, different security adapters can be used. Taking a scenario, what if I have a smaller number of users for my application? Which authentication system should I use in this particular example? Answer is, go for the database authentication. Further, Siebel applications do support single sign-on. Here, Siebel web server extension, which is also called as SWSE, will perform authentication check along with the security adapter. The extra check will be to verify the trust token coming from the web server. We'll discuss this again in much detail in upcoming presentation. So, as discussed before, security adapter is a piece of program which will be responsible for authenticating a user. Object manager will be primarily responsible for contacting a security adapter. As discussed, security adapters are maintained in form of profile subsystem inside Siebel. So let's go over the diagram. As the figure depicts, let's take an authentication flow. So once the user enters the credentials in a browser, the credentials will be passed through the web server and then to the Siebel Application Object Manager. Application Object Manager will invoke the security adapters to connect to the authentication service. Now, you might be wondering, what is this authentication service? The authentication service, which is shown on the right-hand box, it might be a database or a third-party servers where all the users are stored for that particular application. Now, let's discuss what are the authentication services. Siebel supports multiple authentication services. It can be database authentication, where various databases like Oracle, MySQL, or DB2 can be used. It can be various third-party servers like Sun1 LDAP, OID, Oracle Identity Directory, Microsoft Active Directory, etc. These will be in case of third-party authentication. Now, it can be a custom authentication using a Siebel security adapter, which is provided by Siebel in terms of software development kit. It's also called as SDK. So, we do provide a developer's kit by which you can create your own security adapters as well. Moving on, let's learn more about the database authentication. Let's go for the details. Here, the users will be created in a database and maintained as a schema users. Users will have their proper roles in a database. Now, if you look at a figure for how database authentication flow takes place, once the user provides the credentials in a browser, those will be passed to the Application Object Manager. Application Object Manager will invoke the database security adapter, which will validate the user in a database, very importantly, along with the proper roles. Once it verifies, it allows user to log in. Now here, you can enable the password hashing as well, as shown in step 2. So, instead of using a plain text password, you can hash it as well. Database authentication normally used for applications having smaller number of application users. Database authentication is default for all the Siebel applications. So by default, any Siebel application after installation uses a database authentication only. Coming to directory server authentication. Here, the users are authenticated against an external directory server. Here, unlike a database authentication we discussed earlier, directory server will hold all the application users and their credentials. Important point to note here. Now, let's look at a figure to learn a bit more. So, once user provides the credentials, those will be passed to Application Object Manager. Application Object Manager will in turn invoke a security adapter. Now, as we had discussed, those can be either LDAP, ADSI, or a custom security adapter. Here, the security adapter will verify the user existence and its password with the help of Authentication Service shown in the right. After that, with the help of result database account, user will connect to the database and get required data as per the positions. This is how the directory server authentication takes place. Now, let's talk here a bit. What is result database account? Now, as we know, for a third-party authenticated applications, all the users will be stored at the authenticated server. So, all the users will not be created at a database level. So, the question is, how will the users will get data from a database? Here, this particular parameter, the result database credentials, will help to get that data. So, result database account, which is also called as shared database account, will be the single database login for all the users to get the database data. Very important point. Now, again, I would like to spend some time here. Let's go further deep on this particular parameter. So, result database account or a shared database account credentials normally located at LDAP or a ADSI server level. So, I have an important question here. How about some user who is having access to directory server getting that credentials for the shared database credentials and directly from the LDAP server and logging in directly to the database? Question is it possible? Answer, yes, it's possible. So, how to avoid this? Thing is, from 8.0 onwards, Siebel supports LDAP security adapter with Microsoft Active Directory as well. Now, the advantage of using LDAP security adapter over ADSI 1 is LDAP security adapter has the shared database credentials located at the Siebel level itself. Those are located at LDAP security adapter subsystem level. Whereas in ADSI security adapter, those are located at directory server level. So, it's always recommended to use LDAP security adapter for third-party authentication. The reason being, your database credentials are not exposed to the end users. Moving on, important topic, which is single sign-on. Single sign-on is widely used nowadays. So many corporate industries use single sign-on so that they don't have to log in, log out each application multiple times. The thing is, in SSO, once user logs in, user do not have to explicitly log into any application using that SSO plugin. Now, let's go over the figure. Here, the users are authenticated against an external directory server as well at the web server level. So, all the process which we discussed in the last slide, that holds exactly true for single sign-on authentication as well. But there is an addition here. In addition to that, there is an extra authentication at web server level, as we can see in a figure. So, once user provides the credentials, those will be verified at a web server level. Web server will verify same from an authenticated server. Now, that verification will be passed in form of trust token to the application object manager, as described in step 3. Application object manager will turn invoke security adapter. Here, the security adapter will verify the credentials and get shared database account. Now, once the application object manager gets confirmation from security adapter and verifies the trust token, which is shown in step 4, it will allow user to log on. Here, the trust token is passed in form of HTTP header. Moving on. Now let's discuss the security concepts for the Oracle BI Publisher. So, important question, what is Oracle BI Publisher security models? Among many security models which come as default along with Oracle BI Publisher, BI Publisher supports only some security adapters for Siebel, as shown, which are like BI Publisher, Siebel Security, and LDAP security models. Now, the BI Publisher security model only be used for Siebel version 8.1.1 applications, and that too for BI Publisher version 10.1.3.4.0. Nowadays, the widely used BI Publisher versions like 10.1.3.4.1 and 10.1.3.4.2, BI Publisher security model is not used. In turn, Siebel Security or the LDAP security models are widely getting used. BI Publisher does support single sign-on as well. Among many single sign-on systems, BI Publisher supports Oracle Access Manager, Windows Integrated Authentication, and SiteMender Web single sign-on systems. Let's discuss these topics in much detail in upcoming slides. Now, let's learn a bit about very important the Siebel inbound web service. Normally, it's responsible for the authentication. Siebel inbound web service, which is BIPSiebelSecurityWS. WS stands for web service. Is a special web service to validate the user and get proper roles for a particular user. So, as diagram depicts, user performs generating a report. Let's take a scenario here. User performs generating a report from a Siebel application. Oracle BI Publisher receives a request. Here, the BI Publisher queries a Siebel application. For what? It queries a Siebel application to retrieve and validate the roles assigned to that particular user. Now, for this particular mechanism, BI Publisher invokes EAI Object Manager. EAI Object Manager in turn invokes very important BIPSiebelSecurity web service. This particular web service verifies the user details and the roles and then allows a report generation from BI Publisher server. Down below, you can see Authentication Store in yellow box. It's again either a database or a third-party authenticated server. Now, to perform a user verification, how this particular BIPSiebelSecurity web service is working. So, for these particular cases, there are various methods this particular web service uses. Let's discuss that in the next slide. As discussed, BIPSiebelSecurity web service uses various methods to verify a user placing a reporting request. Now, those methods are authenticate, get all roles, and get roles 2. Now, execution of all these methods will happen one after other, starting with authenticate method. The authenticate method authenticates the user by validating proper credentials. Get all roles method retrieves all the Siebel responsibilities from the responsibilities table, whereas the getRoles method retrieves the Siebel responsibilities assigned to a specific user. Now, which user? The user which is placing a reporting request. Now, how this can happen? So there might be an input argument like the user's user ID by which it can query the responsibilities for that particular user. Important point to note here, getRoles method gets responsibilities only for a user, one user, whereas the getAllRoles method retrieves all the responsibilities. Now let's take a pause here. Now we know there are various responsibilities needed for BI publisher reporting. So which are those? Those are XMLP admin, XMLP scheduler, XMLP developer, and the XMLP Siebel guest. Just to give you some more big detail about that, XMLP admin, it has administrator role with no access limitations. Okay, Sharona. Okay, thank you. So, we are discussing about the responsibilities for BIP. So, XMLP admin, it has an administrator role with no access limitations. XMLP scheduler will have something like the users who want to schedule a report. Developers will have, it will allow user to upload a report from Siebel to BI publisher server. XMLP Siebel guest, it will limit access to the reports. It only allows user to generate, view and delete own reports only. Now these responsibilities will be verified by getRoles method. getRoles 2 is not used. Now let's get into some more details about Siebel and LDAP security model. Let's go over Siebel security model. Siebel security model is inbuilt into Oracle BI Publisher from 10.1.3.4.1 onwards. Basically, it interacts with the Siebel by using Siebel inbound web service we discussed earlier. Very important about this security model is it relies on authentication store used by Siebel applications. So whatever the authentication service which the Siebel application uses, it can rely on that. So it can be used either with the database authenticated or third-party authenticated applications. Now, it uses inbound web service through EAI Object Manager. It verifies roles and other authentication information for a user. From where? From an authentication store. Now, because of its simplicity, the Siebel security model is very simple to configure. That's why it is most widely used security model. It is also recommended that you use Siebel security model if you plan to implement report scheduling and the parameterization.
Yes, that is correct.
In an implementation using LDAP authentication, let's discuss more about LDAP security model. So, in an implementation using LDAP authentication, an LDAP security adapter provided with Siebel business applications which authenticates the user against an LDAP compliant directory. Now, the directory stores information that is required to allow users to connect to the database and to the Oracle BI Publisher server. Now, this information is retrieved by Siebel security adapter. Now, when this information will be retrieved? That when the users try to run a report. When users log into a Siebel application that uses LDAP authentication, they already authenticated for the current session as they are already logged in. So, unlike a Siebel security model, it's also inbuilt into Oracle BI Publisher 10.1.3.4.0 onwards. Please note, please note, Siebel security model is inbuilt from 10.1.3.4.1, whereas Oracle BI Publisher LDAP security model is from 10.1.3.4.0 onwards. Now, only difference in LDAP security model is it retrieves the user authentication information from a third-party authenticated store. Most important thing is LDAP security model can be used only for one LDAP store at one time. Please note this point. So, the multiple LDAP store or a server for one BI publisher is not supported as of now. For LDAP security model, special groups need to be created in LDAP server. Now, those groups will be nothing but a kind of authentication mechanism, similar like the responsibilities we have for the BI publisher. So, the groups will be on the name of XMLP_admin, XMLP developer, XMLP scheduler, Siebel scheduler, Siebel admin, and Siebel dev. Now, here, the users that need to run a Siebel report have to have added as a members of these special LDAP groups. These tasks ensure that when Oracle BI Publisher server authenticates with an LDAP directory, the correct roles are used for each user, and hence it limits the reporting action that user can perform. So as you can see, there is a bit more administration task which is involved into LDAP security model as compared to Siebel security model. And just to share with you, for this reason, the most widely used security model as of now is Siebel security model. Now let's go for important topics. Let's discuss a bit more on how to configure BI publisher reporting for an LDAP authenticated Siebel application. Now, first and foremost step for any security model is to import BIPSiebelSecurityWS.xml. Basically, it's the XML for the web service. Now, it's provided as a vanilla web service, and this is located in a tools installation directory, in a repatched directory. Basically, it's a simple XML file. Upon import, it will create a Siebel inbound web service, which is BIP Siebel Security Web Service, in a Siebel inbound web service view. As an optional, you can create local super user for a BI publisher. This is optional, but this user will be useful to log in the BI publisher even if the Siebel application server is down. Basically, the Siebel, the BI publisher super user is not using any security model. So that's why it can log in even if your Siebel application is down. The next step will be to enable the Siebel security model in a BI publisher. This can be done by simply selecting the Siebel security option from a security model drop-down. Mention a web service endpoint as a URL to connect to the EAI object manager as shown in the diagram. Mention the administrator username and its corresponding password. Here, the Siebel administrator credentials are necessary for Oracle BI Publisher application to log into Siebel EAI object manager. You can very well use any user having admin capabilities as well. Moving on, the next step will be to add Siebel CRM reports folder which is located on a BI publisher server to the XMLP roles which we discussed earlier. Now let's stop a bit here. What is this Siebel CRM reports folder? Siebel CRM reports folder is where all Siebel related BI publisher report templates, translation files, and the scheduling configuration information files will be located. Now, by giving the XMLP roles, so by doing this step, Siebel knows which roles can do execution on this particular folder from a BI publisher. Lastly, upon BI publisher services restart, you need to restart the BI publisher services upon all these configurations. Siebel security model verification can be done by logging to the BI publisher server directly. Here, you should log in with the administrator credentials you mentioned in a security model. The very simple method to verify whether my security model setup is successful or not is if you are able to log in by administrator username mentioned in the endpoint URL, that means you have implemented a security model successfully. Now why this is? Because in the background, once you put up Siebel credentials, those will be verified at Siebel database level by using important Siebel inbound web service, which we discussed earlier. So this is for Siebel security model. Moving on, let's configure the LDAP security model. So as we discussed, the LDAP security model can be used to authenticate against an LDAP store. Here, Siebel and BI publisher should use the same LDAP store. Now, as we discussed, special groups needs to be created for this LDAP security model inside LDAP directory server and need to add the users requesting for a reporting solution. Now, as shown in the table, let's go over the attributes one by one. Very first parameter, URL. Now, URL corresponds to the URL to connect to the LDAP server. By default, it uses LDAP protocol and not a HTTP protocol. And also, it uses default port, which is 389 reserved for LDAP security model. Administrator username corresponds to administrator account in a LDAP server. Here, need to mention full location hierarchy as it is shown. Basically, a distinguished name. Administrator password will be the password of admin account inside an LDAP server. Further, the parameter distinguished name for the users. It corresponds to the user. It corresponds basically to the user store inside an LDAP server. Here, the user store or a container will have all the users for that particular Siebel application. As shown in table, we can see OU is equal to people. Let's take this as an example. Here, inside a people organization, OU is nothing but organization unit. We can also call it as a container. So inside this particular OU is equal to people container, all the Siebel applications users will be stored. So in a simple word, this parameter will serve as a location base for all application users. Now same applies for the next parameter, which is distinguished name for the groups. Here, the parameter will correspond to the base location of container of all the groups we created for the LDAP security model. Here again, we need to mention the distinguished name. The other attributes will be, the group attribute name will be CN, group member attribute name will be the member, group description attribute name will be description. Lastly, the attribute used for RDN. Now in this particular table, it's mentioned as a SAM account name. That is because it's for the Active Directory. If you use the LDAP, it might differ to another value. Generally, for a LDAP, it comes as a UID. Moving on. The important topic on how to configure Siebel application for LDAP authenticated application. So I have an application already running on a Siebel, already running on a LDAP authentication. And now I have just installed the BI Publisher. And I need to configure the BI Publisher reporting on already authenticated, third-party authenticated application. So the first and important step to verify here is ensure your all the Siebel application is working perfectly, either on a LDAP or ADSI, whatever authentication mechanism you have configured. Here the minimum requirement will be you should be able to log in application and navigate perfectly fine either with the LDAP or ADSI authenticated application. Once that is done, we can go for the BIP configuration. The first step will be enable the LDAP authentication for the EAI object manager as well for XMLP report server component. Here, modify security adapter name and security adapter mode as shown in the diagram. So for LDAP, it will be LDAP ADPT. For ADSI, it will be ADSI ADPT. Accordingly, the other parameters will follow. Now, the important topic, now, which user ID password should we use here? Here, the user ID password should be of a Siebel employee record that also has an LDAP or ADSI account. You can use anonymous user account as well. Normally, this anonymous user account is mentioned in a eask.cfg located on a web server. So, end of the day, we will have the object manager, XMLP report server component, and the EI object manager. All these three components should use the same authentication for the BIP reporting to work on a LDAP authenticated environment. Just as a reference, the commands shown in the diagram, basically those show how to configure the security adapter mode and the security adapter name by using server manager command line utility. You can also change this parameter by navigating to the application in a screen called as administrator server configuration, then server and the component definition, selecting the parameters. Now, as the note suggests, the very important is all the three components, which is application object manager, EI object manager, and the XMLP report server component should use the same authentication store, either a LDAP or a ADSI. Now, let's discuss in detail about the single sign-on. Question is, what is single sign-on? We'll cover some basics and then we'll go for the BI Publisher configuration. In single sign-on, the users are authenticated by a third party at a web server level. Now that will be by using a SSO plugin. So the once user logs in, user do not have to explicitly log in into any application which is using that particular single sign-on plugin. Now, as we had discussed in a previous slide, in case of SSO, the trust token is getting passed from a web server to the Siebel application object manager. Now, that trust token is passed in a form of HTTP header. Upon taking this trust token along with the Siebel security adapter confirmation, user will able to log in. As we have said, like SSO is widely used nowadays in a big organizations just because we don't need to log in and log out for each industry application they are using out. Moving on, Siebel CRM supports various single sign-on solutions like the Oracle single sign-on, IBM Tivoli, WebSeal, Microsoft integrated Windows authentication, or SiteMinder, etc. But the BI publisher primarily supports Oracle Access Manager, Windows integrated authentication, and a SiteMinder. Now I would like to stop here a bit. Having said all this particular solution could essentially work with any third-party SSO system, provided those should have some prerequisites like the third-party SSO system should be able to send the user identity in form of HTTP header variable, or it should be Siebel Web Single Sign-On configuration is configured on a Siebel Web Engine, or the Siebel Security Adapter profile is used for the authentication, or the BI publisher is configured to use Siebel Security Model. So this particular solution can be used on all of them. Now, let's configure the BI publisher server for a single sign-on solution. Let's take an example of Windows integrated authentication. This is just one example. There are other ways to configure various single sign-on solutions as well. Now, the first important step will be to ensure the Siebel application working perfectly fine on a Windows integrated authentication. Now, to implement a Windows integrated authentication, as shown, you need to have the parameter integrated domain authentication is equal to true in a EAPS.cfg at Siebel Web Server extension level. This is from web server side, as well the core RAS web server level as well. Now execute the important single sign-on steps like the single sign-on trust token, the protected virtual directory, and other important parameters. Now, this particular integrated domain authentication is located under EAPS.cfg. So, as shown in slide, unlike in a LDAP authentication, which is having XMLP report server component configured for an LDAP security model. But in terms of SSO, there is one change here. In case of SSO, use password parameter for the XMLP report server component as a trust token value in a plain text. Please note this point. As you can see in the example, the trust token value is hello. So here need to mention same value for a password parameter here. On a BI publisher server, under security model, use administrator password parameter as a value of trust token. Again, taking as an example, here we need to mention the value as hello as a password for this administrator password parameter. Now, the rest all configuration will hold same as we have discussed in a LDAP authentication. Now, there is a very good article we publish on our Oracle site for this particular SSO implementation. Basically, it covers all the SSO implementation. You can refer that knowledge article document, which is referred on a slide. Moving on to the last topic of the day. Understanding the basics of secure socket layer and its configuration in terms of BI publisher reporting solution. So, what is secure socket layer and why it is used for? The secure socket layer is nothing but a cryptographic protocol, which provides the security as well as the data integrity for the intra-server communications. Now, this is a bit of jargon here. In a plain words, it's a mechanism by which all the intra-server TCP/IP communication, as an example, will be encrypted. And the advantage will be the data confidentiality will not be lost to the hackers. Going over SSL details, it was originally developed by Netscape and then superseded by Transport Layer Security. Secure Socket Layer authenticates the client and a server using the digital signatures. Now, this will be in form of massive authentication codes. It uses a secure protocol, which is HTTPS, or non-secure protocol, which is HTTP. The basic requirement for SSL is to have the client and a server using same algorithm. We're going to discuss this in more detail in the upcoming slide. Now, it's achieved in form of SSL handshake by establishing a secure connection over HTTPS protocol. So basically, whatever the intra-server communication will happen out, those will be in an encrypted format. So what is SSL handshake? We discussed in the last slide. Basically, SSL handshake is nothing but establishing a protocols used during the intra-server communication. Now, this will be in the form of cryptographic algorithms. By handshake protocol, it authenticates both client as well as the server. Now, how this is achieved? This is achieved by using a public key cryptography to create a master secret from which the encryption and authentication keys are derived. Now, let's go over what is this master secret in upcoming slide. Now, SSL handshake we are covering out. As shown in a diagram, this is how the SSL handshake will take place. So, the first client will send the hello message to the server. Now, the secured server will send the hello, along with it will show a certificate. Why? Because client will try to locate that particular certificate in his store. Client will, upon certificate verification, the client will send encryption authorization code. We can also call it as a pre-master secret. The server will verify same and will give some kind of, let's take it as a thumbs up to the client. Now, the client will send further data to the server. Now, how it will send it? Basically, it will encrypt the data and then it will send it to server. The server will decrypt that data by using different decrypt mechanisms. The server will process it and it will send back to the client. Now here, again the data will be in an encrypted format. So, in a very plain text, the communication from client to the server and from server to the client will be encrypted format. Now, this is giving no chance for the hackers because all the data will be encrypted and a hacker will not have the decrypt mechanism. Now, to establish a secure socket layer, we need to use different certificates. As we discussed, those are kind of the signatures in form of authentication codes. Now, as shown, only ASN or PM based certificates can be used for Microsoft Windows, whereas on a Solaris or on a Unix, the certificate authority files must use the PM based. Now, ASN format can also be referred well-known DER format. Now, nothing to worry much here. This will be taken care by your certificate authority administrators. Moving on. Now, since we know what is SSL used for, now there is a requirement where I want all the communication from the Siebel web server to the BI publisher should be in an encrypted format. Now, let's take an example of the web server. Let's take a scenario where my Siebel web server is already configured to use a secure protocol, which is HTTPS. So here, from a browser to web server communication is happening over the secure protocol. So to start with, in this scenario, the first step will be to get the proper supported certificate files. Now, we will import that into Siebel web server just to make the Siebel web server is using the HTTPS secure protocol. Now, in BI Publisher, there is a utility by which the certificates can be imported. It's called as key tool utility. The key tool utility located in a Java key store. Basically, it resides in a Java home part. Now, there is some important point to note. If the Java home variable is not set, then it will automatically use its own Java home, which is located under the Java runtime environment, which is also called as JRE. So as shown, it will be located into Oracle home part under JDK and the JRE part. This will be used as a Java home. Now, all the BI Publisher secure certificates get stored in a single file. This is called as CA-cert file. Now, where this is located? This is again located into the JDK, inside the JRE library, and then inside the security directory. So, this single file will hold all the certificates which we are going to import in a BI Publisher server. Moving on to some bit technical information. Import those certificate files into Java's key store. Now, how will those certificates will be get imported into Java's key store? That will be using the key tool utility. The sample command is as shown in the slide. Now, let's stop a bit here. There are some very important points to consider while importing these certificates. Thing is, for every certificate, there is a certificate authority. Well known, it's known as CA. Sometimes the CA might provide the intermediate certificate files as well along with the client certificate files. The point here is, please import all those certificate files in a BI Publisher server. So, you will import the client certificate, intermediate certificate, and the finally CA certificate, which is certificate authority. Now, all three certificates can also be called as certificate chain. So, the intermediate certificate is not always present. In that case, you just have to import the client certificate along with the CA certificate. Now, as discussed earlier, the certificate files will be stored in a CA-cert file inside Java's key store. So, once these certificates are getting imported by the shown command, we need to declare the Java_OPTS environment variable. Now, this is as shown in the slide. We need to declare exactly as it is. Basically, why we are declaring this? By declaring this variable, we are telling BI Publisher where to search the certificate files. Moving on, the important step in configuring the SSL is use a secure protocol, which is HTTPS, in a Siebel web service endpoint URL, as shown in a screenshot. Here, we are telling BI Publisher to encrypt all the communications, whatever those will happen with the EI Object Manager. Moving on, after setting the HTTPS protocol, in endpoint URL from a security model, we need to restart the BI publisher server. Now, once server comes up, log into the administrator user and navigate to the security configuration. Under that, navigate to the roles and permissions. If you are able to see the roles and permissions just as a hint, then your SSL configuration is almost done. Finally, generate a report from a Siebel application. So log into the Siebel application, navigate to the proper screen. From a report menu, select a report for that particular view. Here, as a hint, use a HTML format first time when you are testing and report after SSL configuration. That's because if you use the HTML format, it is going to open the report into an Explorer. So here, we need to ensure if it's using HTTPS protocol as shown in the slide in a report generated window. Now, what all this means? All this means the BI publisher server is using secure HTTPS protocol for communicating with the Siebel server. And this shows your SSL configuration is successfully implemented. And here we are coming to the end of the presentation. I thank you all for attending the session. Sharonda, can you please take it over from here onwards?
Thank you very much, Captain. We'll open our Q&A in just a moment, so please use the chat feature or phone lines at this time to let us know that you have a question. Joy, can you assist me in giving instructions for posting a question via the phone line?
Yes. If you would like to ask a question, press star and the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We will pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster.
Captain, can you go to the next slide for me, please?
Sure. Okay, thanks, Sharonda. I got some questions. The question is, can I use the same BI publisher server for multiple authentication methods? That is, the LDAP, SSO, and the database authenticated application using the same BI publisher server. Okay, good question. Here, as we had discussed, the BI publisher can be supported only for one authentication store at one time. So either we are using a database authentication or an LDAP authentication. We need to use only the same and only one authentication method for a BI publisher. Because the thing is, the important EAI object manager is playing an important role here. For example, if we have the BI publisher configured for an LDAP authentication, my EAI object manager will be configured for an LDAP authentication. Whereas, if I am using database, it will be configured for a database. So, answer to your question is, BI publisher cannot be used for multiple authentication methods as of now.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay, I have another question. Okay, how do I troubleshoot if my BI publisher server not working after enabling LDAP authentication? Well, very good question. So, the steps, let's go into the steps here. So, for the BI publisher server to be configured on an LDAP authentication, we are configuring EAI object manager and XMLP report server component on an LDAP authentication. So, if the BI publisher is working on a database authentication and not on a LDAP authentication, my straightaway glance will go to the EAI object manager level. So, To answer to your question, for troubleshooting it, raise and log the security adapter events for an EI object manager and check if your EI object manager is able to authenticate with the LDAP server whichever is mentioned there. Yeah. Joel, if you don't have any questions over the phone line, I do have another question coming in.
As a reminder, in order to ask a question, press star and the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And there are no questions at this time.
Okay. I have a question here. Why do we create a super user in a BI publisher? Does creating a super user is mandatory? Well, good question. Super user is nothing but a user in a BI publisher, which is the only user not using any security model. So, since it's not using any security model, it will not be authenticated against an Siebel EI object manager component. So, to answer your query, why do we create a super user in a BI publisher? This is to ensure if I'm not able to log in with the administrator, as well as with and the Siebel login, at least I can log in with the super user. Answering your second question, does creating super user is mandatory? No, it's optional. Yeah, over to you, Joel.
Okay, second, I do have a couple more questions that came across. Let me read them out to you.
Okay.
I have attempted Siebel Security but can't get past the login step using as admin Siebel credentials. I get invalid login, yet super user still works. Any ideas?
Very good question. Normally we face this in a very day-to-day scenario. Well, I will go for the answering second question. The super user works. Yes, that is expected. Because super user is not using any security model, so that will work. Now, since you have configured the Siebel security, and you are also given admin as a username and password there, then there is something wrong with your Siebel inbound web service, which is the Siebel security web service, as we discussed. So, basically the suspicion here is your inbound web service is not able to connect to the EI object manager. I will go for the logging of EI object manager along with the core BIP XDO logs. Basically, those will tell me where this particular authentication is failing out. I hope this is clear.
Very good. Thank you. The next question is, when I want to implement SSL to BI Publisher, does Siebel also need to be implemented with SSL?
Well, good question. So here, let's go in detail about the steps while configuring the SSL. So how the SSL communication takes place? The client connects to a server where the server is already having the secure certificate. Now, here the client will be the browser and the server will be our BI publisher server. So here, the server will have to produce the certificates to the client, where the client going to look up into its own certificate store whether that certificate is present. So, yes, it will be the mutual authentication. So, yes, you will have to have the Siebel also implemented for SSL. I hope it's clear. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chetan. I do have another question over the chat. Basically, we have a user that said, I tried to configure my BI publisher server to use SSL using the blog article, and he lists a blog article that's out there. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, Chetan. And he says it's not working. He wanted to know if somebody could work with them to resolve the issue. What would be the game plan in that situation?
Okay, I need to go over these logs first.
What we could do is I could get the information from this person, and you can speak with them one-on-one session. It might make it a little bit easier for you.
Sure. I need to get the details which are mentioned in a log so that I can kind of for the troubleshooting. Not a problem. Yeah, it's on me.
Okay, then. So what I'll do is I'll forward you that individual's information to follow up with them on a one-on-one. Okay. Yep. Joy, do you have any more questions coming to us over the phone lines at this time?
No, ma'am, we have none at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. And I don't have any more questions over chat either. Okay. So I'm going to conclude the Q&A session at this point in time. We're about 13 minutes over. But before I bring today's webcast to a close, I would like to share some additional information with you. Preston, can you move to the proactive slide for me, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right. The proactive capabilities portfolio is included, guys, in your Premier Support Agreement. Exploring how to get proactive is important because it can lower your organization's costs by preventing problems. Getting proactive also reduces risk and maximizes uptime. When problems do occur, you can get faster resolutions. Avoiding problems is even faster. Proactive tools help you determine which patches you may need to avoid conflicts when you're upgrading. Upgrade advisors help you and walk you through step by step what the process is to upgrade. Discussions in my Oracle Support community let you hear what other customers say about patches and give you lessons learned from their experiences that can help you avoid problems as well. To learn more, please explore the KM note that's listed there, 432.1. You'll discover more about getting proactive. If you have any additional questions, please contact the proactive team, and their email is listed there as well. getactive_ww@oracle.com. Next slide, please, Hudson. All right. This is just a reminder that the current advisor webcast schedule and archive recordings can be found on our new portal. And there's the doc ID number that's listed there, 740-966.1. Next slide, please. And here's a look at the new portal. Welcome to the Advisor Webcast program. To get started, what you want to do is select a product area from the drop-down list box. Here you would select Siebel. Next slide, please. And by product area, you will then be able to view the current schedule and register for an upcoming webcast. You can also view past recordings maintained in the archive section that's listed there as well. Next slide. Thanks to Chetan, and thanks to everyone for joining today's Advisor Webcast session. I know we had some technical difficulties in the beginning. I do encourage you to download the recording and the PowerPoint to this session. Chetan did a fantastic job here today so that you can pick up on the topics and the information that he covered when you weren't able to connect to the WebEx session. Once again, I do apologize for that. We do hope that you found the webcast valuable, and we look forward to you joining us again. Please enjoy the remainder of your day. This concludes today's Oracle Advisor webcast. Thank you again.
Thanks, Sharonda.
This concludes today's conference. You may now disconnect.